Ever wondered what you'd do if someone kept destroying your property and getting away with it? All because she held all the power in your neighborhood? One man's answer turned a simple mailbox into an unbreakable fortress that demolished his tormentor's car and exposed the corruption, destroying his entire community. If you love interesting stories like this that expose the truth, please give this video a thumbs up and tell us in the comments section where in the world you are watching this video, and also do well to smash that subscribe button. In a neighborhood where perfect lawns were the law and breaking rules meant breaking hearts, one woman kept accidentally destroying one man's mailbox. But when he built a fortress that could stop a tank, what happened next shook the entire community to its core. Harmony Hills was the kind of place where dreams came to live, and sometimes to die. Every house looked like it stepped out of a magazine. Every lawn was cut to exactly 2.5 inches. Every mailbox stood like a soldier at attention. But beneath this picture-perfect surface, something dark was brewing. Victoria Sterling ruled this slice of suburban paradise like a queen with a crown made of rule books and a heart made of ice. As president of the Harmony Hills Homeowners Association, she enforced every single regulation with the precision of a surgeon and the mercy of a hurricane. Her silver Mercedes-Benz prowled the curved streets of Willowbrook Drive, Maple Street, and Cedar Lane like a shark hunting for blood. Victoria's eagle eyes missed nothing. Not a dandelion growing too tall, not a fence painted the wrong shade of white, not a garden gnome sitting 6 inches out of place. But when it came to her own actions, well, that was a completely different story. The morning sun painted long shadows across the perfectly trimmed lawns as residents prepared for another day in their picture-perfect prison. Children walked to school in straight lines. Dogs were walked on regulation leashes. Everything was controlled, measured, and suffocating. But beneath the surface of this suburban paradise, a storm was building that would change everything forever. Marcus Washington lived in a modest 2-story house on Cedar Lane, painted the approved shade of beige with the required white shutters. He was a structural engineer, a man who understood how things were built, how they could break, and most importantly, how to make them unbreakable. For 6 long months, Marcus had watched with growing fury as Victoria's Mercedes repeatedly slammed into his mailbox. Not gentle taps, not minor bumps, full-force collisions that left his mailbox bent, broken, and hanging like a flag of surrender. Each time, and there had been 7 times now, Victoria would climb out of her car with that same fake smile painted across her face like makeup. Her voice would drip with honey, but her eyes would flash with steel. "Oh my goodness, Marcus. These roads are just so terribly narrow, aren't they? I'm so sorry for the little accident. I'll have my insurance take care of it, of course." But her insurance never called. The checks never came. And the accidents kept happening. Marcus wasn't just any neighbor. He was a quiet man who believed that actions spoke louder than words, that integrity mattered more than popularity, and that sometimes, you had to take a stand, even when you stood alone. The mailbox wasn't just a mailbox to Marcus. It was a symbol of everything wrong with Harmony Hills. It represented the way Victoria enforced rules on everyone else while breaking them herself. It stood for every time she'd sent threatening letters to neighbors for tiny violations while ignoring her own massive ones. Marcus had watched her fine Mrs. Chun for having a flower pot 2 inches too close to the sidewalk. He'd seen her force the Rodriguez family to repaint their entire house because it was 1 shade too dark. He'd witnessed her make the elderly Mr. Thompson tear down a beautiful garden trellis because it was 3 inches taller than regulations allowed. But Victoria's own house? It had unauthorized paint colors, non-regulation shutters, and a fence that violated at least 4 different height requirements. Yet somehow, mysteriously, she never received violation notices. The system was rigged. The game was fixed. and Marcus Washington was about to change the rules forever. It was a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in late August when everything changed. The temperature had climbed to 95 degrees, and the humidity made the air feel like soup. Marcus stood in his front yard, watering his perfectly maintained lawn. He couldn't give Victoria any excuse to target him for landscaping violations. The familiar purr of Victoria's Mercedes engine cut through the afternoon quiet like a knife. Marcus didn't even need to look up. He knew what was coming. Sure enough, Victoria took the curve at Cedar Lane too fast and too wide. Her front bumper caught his mailbox with a sickening crunch that echoed through the neighborhood like a gunshot. This time was different, though. This time, Marcus had been recording. Victoria climbed out of her car, her designer sunglasses slightly crooked, her perfect hair showing the first signs of defeat. She opened her mouth to deliver her usual fake apology, but Marcus cut her off. "That's enough, Victoria," he said, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of 6 months of frustration. "I've had enough of your accidents." Victoria's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up like 2 question marks. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air. "Excuse me?" she finally managed to say, her voice rising to a pitch that could shatter glass. "I don't appreciate your tone, Marcus. These roads are narrow, and accidents happen. That's why we have insurance. Insurance that never pays out," Marcus replied, stepping closer. "Insurance that never even gets called. This is the 7th time, Victoria. 7 times in 6 months. That's not accidents. That's something else entirely." Victoria's face flushed red beneath her foundation. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You need to be very careful about what you're suggesting, Marcus. Very careful indeed. I have more power in this neighborhood than you seem to understand." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something that surprised him. Beneath all that rage and authority, Victoria Sterling was scared. Scared that someone was finally standing up to her. Scared that her kingdom of control was beginning to crumble. "Maybe," Marcus said quietly, "it's time someone reminded you that power comes with responsibility." The neighborhood had been watching from behind curtains and through windows. Now doors began to open. Faces appeared on porches. The confrontation that had been building for months was finally out in the open. Victoria straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. "This isn't over, Marcus Washington. Not by a long shot. You have no idea what you've started." Marcus smiled, a slow, confident smile that made Victoria take a step backward. "Actually, Victoria, I think I do. And I'm ready for whatever comes next." But neither of them could have imagined just how far this war would go, or how many lives it would change before it was over. Marcus Washington had spent his entire career solving problems that seemed impossible. Bridges that needed to span impossible distances. Buildings that needed to withstand earthquakes and hurricanes. Structures that needed to last for generations. So when Victoria Sterling destroyed his mailbox for the 7th time, his response wasn't anger or revenge. It was engineering. That night, Marcus sat in his home office surrounded by blueprints, calculations, and dreams of justice. He pulled out his laptop and began to design something that would change everything. This wouldn't be just another mailbox. This would be a fortress, a statement, a line in the sand that said, "Enough is enough and no more." Marcus spent hours researching materials, calculating stress loads, and designing a structure that would look completely normal from the outside, but be virtually indestructible on the inside. He consulted building codes, zoning laws, and HOA regulations to make sure every single detail was perfectly legal. The new mailbox would be anchored to a concrete foundation that went 3 feet deep into the ground. The post would be made of steel-reinforced concrete that could stop a truck. The mailbox itself would be mounted on a frame that could withstand impacts that would total most cars. But here was the genius part. From the outside, it would look exactly like every other mailbox in Harmony Hills. Same height, same color, same approved design. Victoria would never see it coming. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus dedicated every free moment to his project. He worked late into the night, mixing concrete, welding steel, and assembling his masterpiece. The garage filled with the sounds of power tools and the smell of determination. His neighbors began to notice the activity. Some stopped by to ask questions, but Marcus just smiled and said he was making some improvements. He kept the full scope of his plan secret, wanting the finished product to speak for itself. As the structure began to take shape, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. For the first time since moving to Harmony Hills, he felt like he had some control over his own life. He was taking matters into his own hands, quite literally building a solution to his problem. The mailbox became more than just a project. It became a symbol of resistance against unfair authority, a monument to the idea that sometimes you have to fight back against bullies, and a testament to the power of thinking before acting. Marcus knew that Victoria wouldn't take this lying down. She would see his new mailbox as a direct challenge to her authority, a public humiliation that demanded response. But he was ready for whatever she might throw at him. He had done his research, covered all his legal bases, and built something that was both a physical and symbolic barrier against Victoria's reckless behavior. More importantly, he had started something that would ripple through the entire community. The real test was yet to come, and Marcus knew that Victoria's reaction would determine whether this was the end of their conflict or just the beginning of something much bigger. The weekend of completion arrived like Christmas morning. Marcus stood in his driveway at dawn, admiring the masterpiece that had consumed his thoughts and dreams for 2 weeks. The new mailbox was a work of art disguised as suburban normality. From the street, it looked exactly like every other mailbox in Harmony Hills. Regulation height, approved white paint, proper positioning, and the required reflective numbers. But underneath that innocent exterior lay 3 feet of concrete foundation, steel reinforcement that could stop a tank, and engineering precision that would make NASA jealous. This wasn't just a mailbox. This was a statement written in steel and concrete that said, "The days of being pushed around are over." Marcus had painted it the exact shade of white required by HOA regulations. The flag was the approved red color, positioned at the correct angle. The numbers were the regulation size and font. Every single detail followed the rules to the letter. But those rules said nothing about how strong a mailbox could be. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lawn as Marcus made his final inspections. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. Everything was about to change. Neighbors began their weekend routines: jogging, walking dogs, tending gardens. Many stopped to admire the new mailbox, commenting on its clean lines and professional appearance. If only they knew what lay beneath the surface. "Beautiful work, Marcus," called out Janet Rivera from across the street. "Much nicer than the old one." Marcus smiled and waved back. "Thanks, Janet. I wanted something that would last." If only she knew how much it was going to last. As the morning wore on, more neighbors stopped by. The mailbox became a conversation starter, a gathering point for the community. People who hadn't spoken in months found themselves chatting about home improvement projects, weekend plans, and neighborhood news. For the first time in ages, Cedar Lane felt like a real neighborhood instead of a collection of houses ruled by fear. But Marcus knew this peaceful morning was just the calm before the storm. Victoria made her rounds every day, and when she saw his new mailbox, the real test would begin. He didn't have to wait long. It was 2:47 p.m. when Victoria Sterling's Mercedes-Benz turned onto Cedar Lane for her daily patrol. The sun was high, the street was quiet, and Victoria was thinking about the violation notice she planned to send to the Johnsons for their slightly overgrown hedge. She approached the familiar curve near Marcus's house at her usual speed. Too fast and too careless. Her mind was already focused on the next house, the next violation, the next opportunity to flex her authority. The Mercedes hit Marcus's reinforced mailbox at 25 miles per hour. The sound was unlike anything Harmony Hills had ever heard. It wasn't just a crash. It was a symphony of destruction. Metal crumpled like paper. Glass exploded like confetti. The airbags deployed with a whomp that echoed off every house on the street. And through it all, the mailbox stood perfectly still, perfectly straight, perfectly undamaged. Victoria sat in her demolished car, surrounded by deflated airbags and the smell of burnt rubber. Her designer sunglasses had flown off. Her perfect hair looked like she'd stuck her finger in an electrical socket. Her hands shook as she tried to process what had just happened. The front end of her Mercedes looked like it had been hit by a meteorite. The bumper was completely destroyed. The headlights were shattered. The hood was crumpled like aluminum foil. Steam rose from the engine like smoke from a volcano. But the mailbox? The mailbox looked like it had just been installed. Marcus appeared on his front porch, coffee mug in hand, with an expression of mild curiosity that didn't quite hide his satisfaction. "Everything okay out there, Victoria?" he called out, his voice carrying just the right amount of concern mixed with barely contained amusement. Victoria struggled out of her car, her legs shaky, her pride completely destroyed. She looked at her ruined Mercedes, then at the pristine mailbox, then at Marcus standing on his porch like he owned the world. "What?" she began, her voice barely a whisper. "What did you do?" "I built a better mailbox," Marcus replied simply. "One that can handle accidents." By now, neighbors were pouring out of their houses like ants from a disturbed hill. The sound of the collision had been impossible to ignore. People came running from 3 blocks away, drawn by the noise and the sight of Victoria Sterling's pride and joy wrapped around a mailbox like a bow on a Christmas present. Mrs. Chun stood on her porch with her mouth open. The Rodriguez family gathered on their lawn, whispering in rapid Spanish. Even old Mr. Thompson hobbled out to see what had happened, leaning heavily on his walking stick. And every single one of them was staring at the impossible sight. Victoria Sterling, the untouchable queen of Harmony Hills, defeated by a mailbox. The crowd that gathered around Victoria's destroyed Mercedes grew larger by the minute. What had started as a few curious neighbors quickly became a full-scale neighborhood event. People were calling friends, taking pictures, and sharing the news like wildfire. "Oh my goodness, Victoria!" exclaimed Sarah Mitchell, trying to hide her smile behind her hand. "Are you hurt? Should we call an ambulance?" Victoria's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a color that didn't exist in nature. Her voice, when she finally found it, was like broken glass mixed with acid. "This is sabotage!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. "He planned this. He built a weapon disguised as a mailbox. This is attempted murder." The crowd murmured with interest. Some looked concerned, others looked skeptical, and a few looked like they were trying not to laugh. Marcus walked calmly down his front steps, his expression peaceful and reasonable. "Victoria, I built a mailbox that meets all HOA regulations. It's on my property. It's the correct height and color, and it's designed to receive mail. The only difference is that it's strong enough to survive accidents." "Accidents?" Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. "You knew I would hit it. You planned this." "I hoped you would drive more carefully," Marcus replied evenly. "But I prepared for the possibility that you might not." The crowd was growing restless. Phones were coming out, recording the confrontation. This was the most excitement Harmony Hills had seen in decades, and nobody wanted to miss a second of it. Janet Rivera stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "Victoria, Maybe this is a good time to ask why you keep hitting Marcus's mailbox in the first place. The rest of us managed to drive down this street without any problems. Victoria whirled around to face Janet, her eyes blazing with fury. The roads in this neighborhood are too narrow. Everyone knows that. It's a safety hazard. Then why? Called out Tom Bradley from the back of the crowd. Are you the only one having accidents? The question hung in the air like smoke. Victoria looked around at the faces surrounding her. Faces that had once looked at her with respect and fear. Now they looked at her with suspicion and, worse, amusement. For the first time in her reign as HOA president, Victoria Sterling was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and out of control. As Victoria stood among the wreckage of her car and her authority, something unexpected happened. The neighbors began to talk, not to her, but to each other. And what they said changed everything. You know, said Mrs. Chen quietly, I've lived here for 8 years, and I've never hit anyone's mailbox. Neither have I, added Carlos Rodriguez. And I drive a much bigger truck than Victoria's car. I've been delivering mail on this route for 15 years, called out Pete Morrison, the postal worker who had stopped to see what was happening. This is the first mailbox accident I've ever seen on Cedar Lane. And I've seen this particular mailbox get hit 7 times in the past 6 months. Always by the same car. The crowd turned to stare at Victoria, who was beginning to look like a trapped animal. That's impossible, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. These roads are narrow. Anyone could have an accident. Then why haven't we? Asked Janet Rivera. Why is it always you, Victoria? Why is it always Marcus's mailbox? And why do you never actually file insurance claims or pay for the damage? Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She looked around desperately for support, for someone to take her side, but found only curious faces and raised eyebrows. I do file claims, she stammered. It's just, the process is complicated and, no you don't, Marcus said quietly. I've been keeping records, Victoria. 7 accidents in 6 months, 7 promises to file insurance claims, and 0 actual claims filed. I have all the documentation. The crowd murmured with interest. This was getting better than a soap opera. Why would you keep hitting Marcus's mailbox on purpose? Asked Sarah Mitchell, genuinely puzzled. Victoria's carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely. Because he needed to learn his place, she exploded. Because he doesn't follow the rules. Because he plants vegetables in his backyard without permission. Because he painted his fence 3 days late. Because he questions my authority at every meeting. Because someone needs to show him that actions have consequences. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Victoria realized what she had just admitted to. Her face went from red to white to green in the space of 3 seconds. I didn't mean. She began. But it was too late. The truth was out. And there was no taking it back. So you've been hitting his mailbox on purpose, Janet Rivera said slowly. For 6 months. Because you don't like him. Victoria looked around at the faces surrounding her. Faces that now looked at her with disgust, disappointment, and betrayal. I am the president of this HOA, she said desperately. I have the authority to enforce compliance. You have the authority to send violation notices, Marcus said calmly. You don't have the authority to destroy people's property with your car. The sound of sirens cut through the afternoon air like a knife through butter. 2 police cars pulled up to the scene, their red and blue lights painting the crowd in alternating colors. Officer Rodriguez stepped out of the first car, his expression professional but curious. He'd been a cop for 20 years, but he'd never seen a Mercedes wrapped around a mailbox in a neighborhood like Harmony Hills. What seems to be the problem here? He asked, looking around at the crowd, the destroyed car, and the pristine mailbox. Victoria immediately rushed toward him, her voice high and frantic. Officer, Thank goodness you're here. This man deliberately built a weapon disguised as a mailbox. He tried to kill me. This is attempted murder. Officer Rodriguez looked at the mailbox, then at the car, then at Victoria. Ma'am, this appears to be a traffic accident. Can you explain how you came to collide with this mailbox? She's been hitting it on purpose for months, called out Mrs. Chun before Victoria could answer. She just admitted it to all of us. The officer's eyebrows rose. Is that true, ma'am? Victoria's face cycled through several expressions before settling on desperate denial. Of course not. These people are lying. They're all against me because I enforce the neighborhood rules. This was an accident caused by poorly designed roads and an illegally reinforced mailbox. Officer Rodriguez walked over to examine the mailbox more closely. He ran his hand along its surface, checked its height and positioning, and even looked at the mounting hardware. Sir, he said to Marcus, can you tell me about this mailbox? Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm and clear. I built it 2 weeks ago to replace the previous one, which had been repeatedly damaged in accidents. It's constructed to Postal Service specifications, meets all local building codes, and complies with all HOA regulations. I have all the permits and documentation if you need to see them. And the previous accidents? 7 incidents in 6 months, all involving the same vehicle, Marcus replied, pulling out a folder from his back pocket. I have photos, dates, and documentation of each incident. Ms. Sterling promised to file insurance claims each time, but never followed through. Officer Rodriguez examined the documentation, his expression growing more serious with each page. Ms. Sterling, he said finally, can you explain why you had 7 accidents with this particular mailbox? Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. Because he's a troublemaker. Because he doesn't respect authority. Because someone needs to teach him a lesson. The officer's expression hardened. Ma'am, are you telling me that you've been deliberately hitting this mailbox? I know. I mean, the roads are narrow. Ma'am, I need you to step over here with me. As Officer Rodriguez led Victoria away from the crowd for a private conversation, the neighbors began to whisper among themselves. The truth was finally out in the open, and it was uglier than anyone had imagined. What happened next changed Harmony Hills forever. Officer Rodriguez returned to the crowd after speaking privately with Victoria for 10 minutes. His expression was grim, and Victoria looked like she'd aged 10 years in those 10 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, the officer announced, after investigating this incident and reviewing the evidence, I'm issuing Ms. Sterling a citation for reckless driving and another for destruction of property. Additionally, this matter will be referred to the district attorney's office for possible criminal charges. The crowd erupted in murmurs and whispers. Victoria Sterling, the untouchable queen of Harmony Hills, was being held accountable for her actions for the first time in anyone's memory. Furthermore, Officer Rodriguez continued, I'm recommending that Ms. Sterling attend driving classes and have her vehicle inspected for safety issues before returning to the road. Victoria stood frozen, her mouth open, her perfect world crumbling around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm and measured. Officer, I don't want to press charges for the previous incidents. I just want this to stop. I want to live in peace in my own neighborhood. The officer nodded approvingly. That's very generous of you, sir. However, the state will still pursue charges based on what we've witnessed here today. As the police cars pulled away, the crowd began to disperse, but the conversations were just beginning. What had started as a simple mailbox collision had exposed the rotten core of their neighborhood's power structure. Victoria's reign of terror was over. But what would replace it? In the days following the great mailbox collision of Harmony Hills, something remarkable happened. The neighborhood began to talk, really talk, for the first time in years. People who had been afraid to speak up against Victoria's authoritarian rule suddenly found their voices. Stories emerged of unfair fines, selective enforcement, and abuse of power that had been hidden for years. The Rodriguez family revealed that Victoria had fined them $500 for planting roses that were supposedly the wrong shade of red. Mrs. Chun shared how she'd been forced to rebuild her entire front porch because it was allegedly 2 inches too wide. Mr. Thompson talked about the beautiful vegetable garden he'd been forced to destroy because Victoria claimed it violated aesthetic standards. Social media groups that had been dormant for years suddenly came alive with discussions about fairness, community standards, and the need for change. The hashtag Mailbox Justice began trending in local social media circles. Marcus found himself at the center of attention he'd never wanted. Neighbors stopped by his house daily to thank him for standing up to Victoria, to share their own stories of abuse, and to ask what they could do to help fix their broken community. "I never meant for this to become such a big thing," Marcus told Janet Rivera during one of their conversations. "I just wanted to protect my mailbox." "Sometimes," Janet replied wisely, "the smallest acts of resistance spark the biggest changes. You showed us that we don't have to accept unfair treatment. You showed us that standing up for ourselves is possible." The H-Way board, which had rubber-stamped Victoria's decisions for years, suddenly found itself under intense scrutiny. Emergency meetings were called. Residents demanded transparency, accountability, and change. Victoria, meanwhile, had retreated to her house like a wounded animal. Her Mercedes was being repaired, her legal troubles were mounting, and her authority was completely destroyed. The woman who had once ruled Harmony Hills with an iron fist was now a laughingstock, hiding behind drawn curtains. 3 months after the collision, Harmony Hills was barely recognizable. Victoria had resigned as H-Way president in disgrace, facing criminal charges and a civil lawsuit from the Rodriguez family for years of discriminatory enforcement. Her house went up for sale 2 weeks later. Marcus had been elected as the new HOA president by the largest margin in the neighborhood's history. His platform was simple: fair enforcement, transparent governance, and community over conformity. The first thing he did was establish a community garden where residents could grow vegetables together. The second thing was to create a neighborhood watch program focused on helping elderly residents with yard work and home maintenance. The third thing was to institute regular community meetings where everyone had a voice. Property values didn't fall, as some had feared. Instead, they rose as word spread about the positive changes in Harmony Hills. Families began moving to the neighborhood specifically because of its reputation for fairness and community spirit. The reinforced mailbox became a neighborhood landmark, a symbol of the power of standing up for what's right. Children walked past it on their way to school. Tourists driving through the area stopped to take pictures with it. And local news stations featured it in feel-good stories about community transformation. Marcus kept the mailbox exactly as it was, maintained and painted, but never moved or modified. It served as a daily reminder that sometimes the strongest barriers aren't built to keep others out, but to protect what's rightfully ours. The story of Marcus Washington and his reinforced mailbox spread far beyond Harmony Hills. It became a symbol of quiet resistance, of the power of preparation over confrontation, and of the importance of standing up for what's right even when you stand alone. Marcus never sought fame or recognition. He simply wanted to live in peace in his own neighborhood. But his example showed others that change is possible, that bullies can be stopped, and that communities can heal when people choose fairness over fear. Victoria's downfall became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of accountability in leadership. Her story reminded everyone that power without responsibility is just tyranny in disguise. But perhaps the most important lesson came from the transformation of Harmony Hills itself. A community that had been divided by fear and rigid rules became united by shared values and mutual respect. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years became friends. Children who had been afraid to play in their own yards began organizing street games and block parties. The mailbox still stands today, as strong and unmovable as ever. It bears a small plaque that reads, "Sometimes the strongest walls are built not to keep others out, but to protect what's rightfully ours." And every day, as people pass by that mailbox, they remember that change is possible, that standing up for yourself doesn't require anger or hatred, and that sometimes the smallest acts of resistance can spark the biggest transformations. If you ever find yourself facing a Victoria Sterling in your own life, someone who uses their authority to bully others, who enforces rules selectively, or who thinks they're above the very standards they impose on others, remember Marcus Washington and his reinforced mailbox. You don't have to fight with anger. You don't have to respond with hatred. You just have to stand firm, prepare well, and refuse to be moved. Because sometimes, the best revenge is simply refusing to be broken. And sometimes, the strongest statement you can make is building something so solid, so unshakable, and so right that it stands as a monument to justice long after the bullies have gone home. The mailbox that changed everything still stands in Harmony Hills, a testament to the power of one person willing to say enough, and the community that found its voice because someone was brave enough to speak first.